Good morning. Welcome to Salesforce as an Agile presentation layer for external data. My name is Ralph Schundelmeyer. I will be your presenter this morning. I have to admit I'm a little bit in awe. I thought I would be in like a small room somewhere in a corner presenting about Salesforce Connect, and now I'm here on big stage, so I admit I'm a little nervous. Again, my name is Ralph Schundelmeyer. I'm a director of product management on the platform team. I own Salesforce Connect, the product that we feature today. I also do own several data integration tools. First and foremost, Data Loader. Some of you might use it. The Data Import Wizard, and we're also working on a new solution called Data Integration Services, which we have a separate session later this week. A little about me. I grew up in Germany. You can probably hear from my Texas accent. Moved to Philly in '95. Was planning to stay for about a year. Fast forward over 20 years, I'm still here. I claim that I learned English from Eddie Murphy simply because when I moved, I really had a hard time listening. I mean, you have school English, but it's very different when you work in implementation projects. And HBO had a special at a time with Eddie Murphy movies that I've all seen in Germany. So after reviewing the same movie 3 or 4 times, I finally had a clue what he was talking about in the movie. Prior to Salesforce, I spent about 10 years doing cloud startups. So I've actually been in the cloud since 2000, which is quite a long time. And I have to admit, we came a very long way. I currently live in Berkeley with my wife and 2 kids. And my favorite day at work is actually called Goals Against Hunger. It's a volunteer soccer event that we do every year. And for one day, you can pretend to be a professional soccer player. You donate money. You play soccer for a good cause. It's really a lot of fun. I've been at Salesforce for a long time, so I claim my 7 lives. I've worked on the Sales Cloud, on Cheddar, Communities, Service Cloud, SOS, currently in Platform. So hopefully this will be an interesting session. You all know this wonderful slide, forward-looking statement. Especially today, we will also talk a little bit about what's coming on the roadmap. So please make your purchasing decisions on what's available now and not what's coming. So what are we going to talk about today? It's really a huge area, so it probably will feel a little rushed. I want to point out there's an integration booth just kitty corner from here, where we also have a demo. There will be experts throughout the conference, so if you have more detailed questions, you can also always go there and ask your questions. So I will start with a quick intro, just at everybody's level set. What is Salesforce Connect? Then I will do a quick demo of the key features and capabilities. That demo initially will be focused more on the declarative aspect of Salesforce Connect, and then we dive into how can I leverage external data more programmatically. I think it's also important to talk a little bit about considerations, what's possible, what's not possible, what are some of the limits that we have, and then we give a quick outlook, what are the things that we are currently working on. And then, of course, I want to leave some time for Q&A. Now, what is Salesforce Connect? Salesforce Connect is really a virtual data integration solution. And how did we come up with this idea? Wouldn't it be awesome if we only would have one system that stores all the data for our users? A lot of problems would easily go away. Unfortunately, that's not the case. You're probably all using Salesforce. You might also use SAP for your ERP, Oracle. You might have custom-built applications. So data is all over the place. Yeah, and that's really a big challenge for users. So you can build complex data integrations using ETL tools where you copy data so that when you need the data, you have it available, or you keep the data where it is and access it on demand and only bring in the data that you need. So that was kind of the paradigm that led to the development of Salesforce Connect. Another aspect is also data residency issues. I mean, there are a lot of data residency issues, especially in the beginning. We only had data centers in the US, but there are countries like China, Russia. They just do not let you store data outside of their countries. So how can you leverage Salesforce with data that is stored in those countries? And then, of course, there are compliance issues, right? Especially when you think about healthcare, about banking, heavily regulated industries. So some of the key aspects of Salesforce Connect, it was really designed to tightly connect any API-accessible system. The goal was really to make this happen declaratively, so as little code as possible on the Salesforce side. Initially, we started out with read capabilities only, and then customers really asked for, hey, I also want to write back into my external system. I want to create records in that system. And all this is done without copying data. Salesforce Connect can also be used to exchange data between Salesforce orgs. Many of our larger customers have, unfortunately, a large number of orgs, and they want to share data. Or think of an M&A situation. You acquire a company that is also using Salesforce. In order to quickly make the data available, you could also use Salesforce Connect. And then features that we introduced recently, reporting on external data. You want to be able to just run basic reports on the external data, or you want to mesh up data between Salesforce and the external systems in one report. And the Wave team has also been doing a great job in making external data available through Wave trending. So you run a report in Salesforce and then use the data for Wave trending. Now, you're probably all familiar with standard objects, custom objects, and for Salesforce Connect, we introduced a new object type called external object. It's kind of the cousin of the custom object because it's very similar. And it basically is a representation of your external API structures. So if you have data in SAP, for example, orders, we bring in that metadata and basically copy it within Salesforce. So the data transformation aspect is really minimized because you bring the external data in as is, but it looks and feels like Salesforce data. Now, the beauty of Salesforce Connect and the external objects is that you get a lot of stuff for free. For free meaning it's a platform feature, so you can really leverage the power of the platform with these external objects. So we talk about search, yeah? You will be able to search data in your external system from within Salesforce or Salesforce federated search. What we always kind of minimize is mobile, right? I mean, I don't have to do any additional mobile development to bring in external data into my mobile app on Salesforce. I mentioned dashboards, and then of course we talked today about the programmatic aspects, like how can I use Apex, Visualforce, Sockle, Sourcel, Lightning components, all these tools that are available on the platform to really leverage the external data within Salesforce. We support 4 integration patterns. I think the most prevalent one is OData. We decided to support the standard. It's a fairly or relatively new standard. It was spearheaded by IBM and Microsoft. Originally designed to be a lightweight protocol for mobile use cases. Think of it a little bit as an XML light. And there are more and more companies actually leveraging this standard. We have the Salesforce Connect Apex Connector framework. So it's a framework that allows you to build custom adapters to pretty much any API accessible system out there, because unfortunately there are a lot of applications out there that do not support OData. I mentioned connect to other Salesforce orgs. It's basically a Salesforce connector that we built to talk to other Salesforce applications. And then I would also like to mention our middleware partners, because I mean there are hundreds of different applications out there, and these partners really help us to provide connectivity. They basically connect to the external data source and expose it as OData to Salesforce Connect so that we can consume it, which is a really powerful aspect. Now let's switch to the demo. So I will begin just walking you through setup so that you can see where to find all these things, and then move into how does it appear in the application. So at the core of Salesforce Connect is what we call an external data source. So think of it as a definition of all the parameters that you need to connect to that data source. And I'm using here for this demo an example. It's a simple OData 2 sample service that is out there. It's a sample service that you can also use to play around. So what you need to define typically is some metadata around a name for the external data source. You have to specify what type, whether it's an OData 2, OData 4, whether it's a custom connector. And then you see, for example, here settings like, is it an external data source that I want to write back to as well? We have different formats. We support JSON and Atom. And then, of course, you need to specify the authentication. Now, once you provide all this data, you save it, then you will see a validate and sync button. And I've done this already previously. But basically what it does when you click that button, it calls out the external system. In this case, it's an OData service. It grabs the metadata from that endpoint and automatically generates all the metadata that we need within Salesforce. So all these external objects that you see down below here, they have been generated automatically based on the metadata in the OData service endpoint. So as an admin, there's very little that you have to do. There's no coding involved to get this done. Now let's just look at one of these objects. I'm looking here at an invoice object. And for those of you who are familiar with standard and custom objects, it looks very familiar. I mean, you have your object definition, you have your standard fields, your custom fields, your page layouts, and so on and so forth. And like I said, all of this is generated automatically. I want to point out some things that are not generated automatically as of today. Those are relationships to either Salesforce objects or relationships to other external objects. So here we have an indirect lookup. Indirect lookup means I'm looking up to a Salesforce account, Salesforce object, or I have an external lookup, which means I'm looking up to another external object. Now, this is how it looks like on the setup side. Now here I'm simply going to the application. I look at an account in Salesforce, and this account is hooked up with an external system. And you see already here on the related list, for every external relationship that I've created, you also get a related list automatically generated. Here I have customer records because the customer representation in the external system might be different than in Salesforce. I have all the orders that are associated with this external system and all the invoices. Then I can also drill down into details here. Yeah, and all of these are synchronous call-outs to the external system, right? So the data is not stored in Salesforce. All I have is a reference, and then I go out, make my call, bring the data in. Now, what I like about this, you also have chatter capabilities. So you can still collaborate on these records even though they don't exist. The way we enable this is, the only thing that we really save within Salesforce is an ID, and that ID is mapped to the external ID, and by doing so, we can, for example, enable chatter. Okie doke. Now we talked about reporting. So, I mean, for those of you familiar, as soon as you create an object definition and you flag it to allow reporting, the system automatically generates for you a report type. So based on that report type, then I can generate individual reports. For example, here I just want to see what are all the customers that I have defined in my external system, and I can run this report here real time. I mentioned the trend in wave feature earlier. So basically, you have a standard report definition. Of course, you need wave, but you would click the trend in wave button. You would set up a schedule. Some of you might still remember the old snapshot capabilities in reporting. It's very similar. You take a snapshot at a point in time, and then this data, in this case, is really copied into a wave data set for trending analysis. Of course, because I talked about it a little earlier. You can also mesh up data from Salesforce with data in the external system. And here I have a report where I link Salesforce accounts to orders and invoices in the external system. And again, I mean, it's a real-time call out, bringing in the data. And then, of course, you also have all the capabilities of the analytics tool playing here with the external data. What I also want to show quickly is how can you leverage predefined Lightning components. So I simply created a quick app to leverage the invoice data or in general data from the external system. These are all predefined Lightning components that I grouped together. So I have a reporting component, I have filtered list view component. So all of this happens declaratively. You don't have to do any coding for these Lightning components. Later on, I will talk a little bit more about how can I programmatically use Lightning components to get much more value. So here, this is the Lightning app builder. I will not deep dive, but you basically have your standard components here to the left. If you have already created custom components, you would see them. If you would have downloaded components from the App Exchange, you would see them here. And then you simply place them on your layout here. For example, this is the report that I put in. So again, this is all declarative. You don't have to code to leverage this capability. Now, what I showed you so far was really just how can I use Salesforce Connect declaratively. So I'm an admin, I might not have coding capabilities, I can still use the power of the feature. But what we always have to be aware of is, because it's a platform feature, I mean, all the programmatic tools that I have available for custom objects, for example, very much the same is supported for external data. The key difference is that we kind of translate it into, for example, OData queries when we work with an OData endpoint, or we use the Salesforce connector framework. So this is just a very basic example how you can use SOCL. So you have a SOCL query here where you want to select the external ID, the name from the external objects called products, and you only want to retrieve the first 3 records. This SOCL query then will translate it into an OData query, into a GET query that looks like this. And this is like a sample of the result that is being returned. The same for SOCL. Again, I have a SOCL query. I want to find here pink lemonade in the name field of the product table that resides in the external system. Again, it's being translated into an OData query, which you see down here. And this is the result that is coming back. Now, I have to admit, when I took over Salesforce Connect about 2 years ago, I was surprised that it's an integration solution, but it's also API enabled. So external objects retrieve data from an external system, but I can use APIs to retrieve data from the external object. So I can use the REST API to query the external object, which then in turn queries the external data source, which is really powerful. So here we have a REST API query. I simply want to retrieve the product with the ID 4, which is then being translated to an OData query to return the data. Now, I think about a year and a half ago, we introduced write capabilities. So you can write back using the UI, but you can also write and create using database classes or Apex code. And there are two key classes that are important. One is the insert async, where you basically make an asynchronous call into the external system to update data or to create data. Or then you have the insert immediate, where you synchronously call the external system to generate, for example, a record. And if we have time, I might actually be able to show you that. Last but not least, new with Lightning Experience are Lightning Components, which really provides a new way to leverage external data within the application. And I'm working very close with our middleware partners, and one of our partners is a company called Vigence. And what they have created is a set of out-of-the-box components that you can use for SAP integration. So they are really an SAP integration expert, and they decided to develop a library of components that you can basically download from the App Exchange. It doesn't require any development work on the Salesforce side, on the SAP side. It's basically you install it, and you can retrieve data from SAP or even right back to the SAP system. And I'll show you how these guys look like. So I will not go into details of the code here, but I just want to show you, I have a different account. It uses a different record type, so I can separate here the demo. But what you will notice here is this account is linked to a different external data source. Also keep in mind that this might be a scenario that you have. It's not just one external data source. You have multiple, because you might have multiple business units. They all use different systems, but you really want to have a 360 view of the customer and bring in all the data into Salesforce. So what you see here then are additional components. For example, I have a sales summary, I have a credit limit check, I have payment history information, I have the payment terms, my forecast. So this is all data here, SAP sales order. This is all data that resides in SAP, and you basically build an app leveraging these pre-built components. So if I go to the Lightning App Builder, and because this is a managed package, oops. So you see here all the components that are in this package. We looked at the sales summary, we have the credit overview, we have the payment history, sales order history. So these are all out-of-the-box components that they provide. And then you simply use the app builder to drag and drop them on your page layout. And that's pretty much all you have to do. Of course, if you want to use them out of the box. I mean, it's always a different story if you want to modify. So how do these components look like? Oops. And I just focus here on the SAP ones. So, I mean, we basically talk about Aura code that is being created to retrieve the data, to manage the display, and I mean, basically using the entire programmatic power of the platform. Now, just trying to manage time here. So what are we currently working on? What's coming? One downside of Salesforce Connect is we don't store any data. So sometimes people want to provide an audit trail. They want to provide at least some kind of history of what have my users been doing with external data. So we started a pilot for event monitoring this past summer release. So we basically give you the ability to log your Salesforce Connect activity, and then currently it's a nightly download that you can analyze. We really would like feedback here, feedback especially in terms of are there any wave apps that we need to build to help you Is the frequency that we download the data enough? Do you need more real-time capabilities so that you, for example, for development purposes, see immediately what happened? So really a key feature for us. Another big topic is batch apex. So we partially supported it for quite some time, but this release we really focused heavily on making it rock solid so that you can really leverage batch apex to work with large amounts of data that reside in an external system. So really using batch apex for complex long-running processes to bring in thousands of records for processing, but those records do not reside in Salesforce. Always keep in mind that this is all virtual data. And then another big feature, we get a lot of questions about workflow and trigger support. Now, because external data doesn't exist in Salesforce, we really have no way of defining triggers. You can define triggers on custom objects and standard objects that trigger communication with the external system. But so far today, you would have to build custom logic if you want external events trigger processes in Salesforce. So we're shooting for pilot in winter to detect relevant changes in the external system. So if there's an event that is important to me, for example, a customer paid an invoice, or it could be a customer has not paid an invoice, or a new purchase requisition has been created that I need to approve, we will be able to detect this event. We will then retrieve the information and create a change event in Salesforce. This change event is a physical record in Salesforce, which then allows us to actually leverage triggers. So we're not storing the data, but we store the pointer to the change, which allows us then to trigger workflows in Salesforce with external events. We will be supporting 2 different detection methods. We start with polling, simply because we encounter a lot of external systems that are not as sophisticated. So in this case, we basically poll the system, is there a change relevant for me? And then as a next step, we will be supporting the OData for callback feature, meaning the external system can let us know if a change occurred, and then we go get the data, which is probably much less chatty than the polling capabilities. Now, I want to spend 2 minutes talking about considerations. I mean, these are just some really basic items that are important for you to know when you develop. For example, today we have a maximum number of external objects of 100. It sounds like a lot, but if you're a larger company with multiple external systems, 100 might not be good enough. So we are currently working on increasing that number. Another item is the maximum joins per queries. Might sound familiar. It's really also a socket limitation. You can only link 4 objects. From an OData point of view, or in general, we currently allow you to bring in 50,000 new records. So basically think of this as whenever we bring in a new record, we do an ID mapping and store it in the system. And then currently we have 10,000 OData callouts. These are all soft limits, and if customers need to have them increased, we usually work with our customers to do that. Now, there are a couple of features that are not available. I will not go through all of them, but keep in mind that everything that requires data to be physically stored in Salesforce is a challenge for Salesforce Connect because the data doesn't exist. So things like merge fields or attachments, flows, nodes. So these are all things that are currently not available. There are also a couple field types that we do not support. I think the biggest request we currently get is around formula fields, where customers want to use formula fields to, for example, aggregate external data and display it, for example, on a standard object. We are looking at ways how we can make this happen, but we don't have really short-term plans. You see on the right-hand side, auto number, currency, and pick lists. These are now all supported in the Salesforce to Salesforce connector. We are working on making that happen with other connectors as well. So I'm a little over time, but I hope we can spend maybe a couple minutes on questions if you have. As I mentioned, we have a booth over there. There's always knowledgeable personnel if you have more detailed questions. So any questions? Yes? Do we have microphones by any chance? Okay.
What about taking that data that comes in from those external tables
Uh-huh.
and populating another table inside of it?
So I think the question was, can I bring in external data and then store it in a table if I want to? Yes. I mean, this is the beauty of Apex, right? You can bring it in virtually and then you save it to a custom object, right? I mean, there's no reason to prevent you to do that. Actually, a lot of customers kind of were always ahead of us. They also used it for exactly that purpose. We always said, no, it's external data, we don't want to store it, but they found an easy way to store it in custom objects, for example. Do you mind standing up? And yes. So the question was, can you use Salesforce Connect to bring in data into communities? That's a yes. We already have customers live that have a partner community, they have custom communities, and they bring in data from the external system and make it available in a community to external users. There's a microphone, yay.
Does this work? Oh. Sweet.
Oh yeah, you want to come up here? Let's sing a duet.
So if we have systems that we want to integrate with which don't offer OData for integration,
Yes.
are there resources available for building the middleware so that we can take their data and provide an OData for API for Salesforce Connect?
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple tools available to you. There are development tools that allow you to develop an OData service yourself. I mean, Microsoft has really good tools to do that. The Apex Connector framework is also a good example. There is sample Apex Connector code actually in the documentation. At this point, I also want to give a big shout out to our doc writer, Tess Napili. She has done an amazing job documenting all these features. There's a lot of stuff really in documentation, so I really encourage you to leverage that. We are working on more sample code for these connectors. But then sometimes when speed is important and you don't have technical resources, there's also, like I said, a wide range of middleware partners that expose that external data as an OData endpoint, so you don't have to code necessarily. Okay? Oh boy.
Just on the two methods that you mentioned about as an alternative for triggers, like polling and there was another option, I can't remember. Can you explain a bit more in terms of how those would work? I guess you mentioned that there would be on winter 18 when those two features are available. So instead of writing triggers, we use those two alternatives.
Yes, just to clarify, you cannot write a trigger on external objects,
so the
right?
alternatives, yes.
So what some customers already do today, they create a platform event and use that. But what will be available in winter is the ability to poll the external system. So you basically define a topic that you're interested in, and we poll the external system, based on parameters. Let's say, has a new order been created in the last hour? If it's a yes, we retrieve the data, we create a change event. On that change event, you can have a trigger that then triggers the process within Salesforce. Say again? We are not using the streaming API for that, no. But streaming API could be an alternative that customers use today to mimic similar functionality.
So we've been using Salesforce Connect to connect to one of our partners, Matrix, and it's fine. And it's API connection. They don't have OData. They don't have OData. So the query part is just fine. Upsert is also working, but I want to be able to log what I upserted so that I have a record of it, and I'm having problems with that. So I've got a case at Salesforce, but if you're affecting the outside system, and that's a case where you absolutely want to be able to know what you're doing. So you mentioned that people wanted.
Yeah. So we currently have the pilot for event monitoring. So I would say let's talk about that if that solves your need, because that's kind of the use case that we're envisioning. We talked a lot about regulated industries. you somehow want to keep track, and event monitoring is the perfect use case for that. I don't know how much time we have. Maybe 2 more questions?
I have a very brief question on external data change detection that you guys are building.
Yes.
So how close to real time would that be?
Sorry, say again?
How close to real time would that be?
Well, with polling, you know, it's whatever polling cycle you define, right? If we in the future have the callback functionality, I mean, it's as near real time as can be, having 2 systems talk to each other.
Okay, it's like more like Salesforce is making the calls and trying to understand if there is a change.
So with polling, we call and say, hey, is there a change that I subscribe to? And if there's a change, we create an event, right?
Okay.
If it's callback, the external system tells us there is a change, and then we call back to get the data.
Okay.
Okay, one last question.
Last question.
So I just wanted some clarification on the reporting, this out of the box sort of. So, you know, we have let's say we connect to Eloqua, for example.
Okay.
And we get, you know, users, their emails, the number of times they did something. And then we have the sort of accounts in Salesforce, and we want to aggregate these, right, by accounts, these users, their activities, and so on. Would that just fall out of the standard, within the standard reporting functionality, this kind of a join and aggregation?
I mean, I don't know if Eloqua has
Yes, I
a
understand.
connector, but
Yeah.
if they would have, I mean, you basically in setup you have to create that relationship, and
Yeah.
then there is what is called a custom report type,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Okay.
but standard functionality should do that for you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.